The crimson sunset bled across the Montana sky as Josephine Keller stumbled upon a sight that stopped her heart cold. There, behind the livery stable, hunched over in the dirt with his hat fallen beside him, was Jackson Forrester, a man she'd admired from afar since arriving in Willow Creek 3 months prior. But it wasn't the unexpected encounter that froze her in place. It was the alarming pool of blood he was coughing into his handkerchief. "Mr. Forrester?" Josephine rushed forward, her skirts gathering dust as she knelt beside him. Her medical bag, ever present at her side, felt suddenly heavy with responsibility. Jackson's head snapped up, his normally vibrant blue eyes clouded with pain and embarrassment. When he recognized her, he hastily tried to shove the bloodied cloth into his pocket. "Miss Keller," he managed, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine evening for a stroll." "You're coughing up blood," she said flatly, reaching for his wrist to check his pulse. He pulled away. "It's nothing. Bit of trail dust caught wrong." Josephine had come to Montana Territory in 1878 to serve as the town's new nurse after the previous one had left to marry. At 25, she'd already seen enough in her Boston hospital training to recognize when a man was lying about his condition. "Trail dust doesn't produce blood, Mr. Forrester," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I should fetch Dr. Montgomery." Panic flashed across his face. "Don't tell the doc," Jackson said, his voice suddenly urgent as he grabbed her arm. "Please." "I can't afford." Another coughing fit overtook him, bringing forth a fresh spray of blood. Josephine watched him struggle to breathe, her medical training warring with her growing personal feelings for this stubborn cowboy. She'd admired him from the moment she'd arrived in town, not just for his handsome features, but for his quiet kindness, the way he'd helped the widow Johnson repair her roof without being asked, how he always had a gentle word for the children who followed him around town. She made her decision. "You're getting both of us," she declared, settling her bag more firmly on her shoulder. Jackson looked up, confusion evident through his pain. "Both, me and the doctor," she clarified, helping him to his feet. "No arguing, I won't watch you die of stubbornness." "I ain't dying," he protested, though the pallor of his skin suggested otherwise. "And I can't pay the doc. The ranch we're struggling as it is." Josephine looped his arm over her shoulder, bearing his weight as best she could despite their height difference. "Your life matters more than money, Mr. Forrester. Now walk with me before you collapse again." As they made their slow way toward the doctor's office at the edge of town, Josephine could feel his resistance in every step. The streets were mostly empty as dusk settled, which she counted as a blessing. Jackson Forrester had his pride, and the fewer witnesses to his weakness, the better. "My brother," he said suddenly, his voice rough. "He can't know, he'll worry himself sick." "Your brother has every right to worry," she countered. "Family is supposed to care." Jackson fell silent, and Josephine worried he might be losing consciousness until he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand, he's just a kid. 17, I'm all he's got." The weight of his words settled on her shoulders, heavier than his physical form leaning against her. "Then you owe it to him to stay alive, don't you?" Dr. Montgomery was just closing up his office when they arrived. His eyebrows shot up at the sight of them, Jackson now barely conscious and Josephine nearly buckling under his weight. "Good heavens," the older man exclaimed, hurrying to take Jackson's other side. "What happened?" "He's been coughing blood," Josephine explained as they maneuvered the cowboy onto the examination table. "I found him behind the livery. Pulse is rapid, breathing labored." The doctor nodded, already reaching for his stethoscope. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, directing the question to Jackson. The cowboy remained stubbornly silent. "Mr. Forrester," Josephine said, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Please." Jackson sighed, wincing at the pain it caused. "Few weeks maybe, started with a cough, thought it'd pass." "And the blood, doctor?" Montgomery pressed. 3 days, Jackson admitted reluctantly. "Started spitting pink, today was worse." The examination that followed confirmed what Josephine had feared. Jackson had developed pneumonia, likely exacerbated by the dusty cattle drive he'd returned from 2 weeks prior. Without proper treatment, he could easily die. Bed rest, Dr. Montgomery prescribed firmly. Complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks. Herbal steam treatments twice daily. I'll prepare a tincture to help with the cough and inflammation. Jackson was already shaking his head. Can't. The ranch can wait, Josephine interrupted. Or do you want your brother to run it alone after burying you? Her harsh words had the intended effect. Jackson fell silent, his expression grim but resigned. Speaking of which, the doctor added, you should stay in town. The ride to your ranch is too strenuous, and you need someone to monitor your condition. I don't have money for a hotel room, Jackson protested. Josephine exchanged a look with Dr. Montgomery. There's a room above the clinic, she offered. It's meant for patients who need overnight observation. I can't pay, consider it an investment, she cut him off. Willow Creek needs its best rancher healthy for the spring cattle drive. The hint of a smile tugged at Jackson's lips before another cough racked his body. When he removed the handkerchief from his mouth, fresh blood stained the already soiled fabric. Dr. Montgomery quickly prepared a draught to ease his coughing, and Josephine helped Jackson drink it. Within minutes, his breathing seemed less labored, though his eyes grew heavy with the medicine's sedative effects. I'll stay with him tonight, Josephine told the doctor. You should go home to Mrs. Montgomery. The doctor hesitated. Are you certain? It wouldn't be proper. Propriety matters less than his life, she replied firmly. Besides, I'm a trained nurse. This is my duty. After the doctor left, promising to return at first light, Josephine settled into the chair beside Jackson's bed. The small room above the clinic was sparsely furnished but clean. Through the window, she could see the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Jackson stirred, his eyes opening to narrow slits. You don't have to stay, he murmured. I know, she replied, adjusting the cool cloth on his forehead. But I want to. Why? The question was simple but loaded with unspoken complexity. Josephine considered her answer carefully. Because I believe every life has value, even stubborn cowboys who won't admit when they need help. A weak chuckle escaped him before he drifted back to sleep. Josephine watched the rise and fall of his chest, counting each breath as a small victory. Dawn found her still by his side, having dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable wooden chair. Jackson's fever had spiked during the night, requiring frequent changes of the cooling cloths. Now, as golden light filtered through the window, his temperature seemed to have stabilized, though his breathing remained labored. Dr. Montgomery arrived with fresh supplies and a concerned expression. How did he fare? The fever rose around midnight, Josephine reported, stretching her stiff limbs. It broke about 2 hours ago. He's been sleeping since. The doctor nodded, examining Jackson with practiced efficiency. The next few days will be critical if infection takes hold in the lungs. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the grim possibilities. What about his brother? Josephine asked suddenly. Someone should inform him. Daniel Forrester, Dr. Montgomery supplied. Good lad, works at the ranch with Jackson. I'll ride out there, Josephine decided. He deserves to know. The doctor looked surprised. It's nearly 10 miles to the Forrester ranch. Are you certain? I've ridden further for less important matters, she replied, gathering her shawl. Will you watch over him until I return? With the doctor's assurance, Josephine borrowed a horse from the livery and set out for the Forrester ranch. The day was clear and cool, typical for late autumn in Montana territory. The journey gave her time to think about Jackson, about her own place in this frontier town, about the strange pull she felt toward this man she barely knew. The Forrester property came into view by mid-morning, a modest ranch house with a large barn and several corrals. Even from a distance, Josephine could see it was well maintained, a testament to the brothers' hard work. A young man emerged from the barn as she approached, his resemblance to Jackson unmistakable despite his younger age. Daniel Forrester had the same strong jawline and piercing blue eyes, though his hair was several shades darker than his brother's sun-bleached brown. "Can I help you, madam?" he called, his expression curious but cautious. Josephine dismounted, smoothing her rumpled skirts. "Daniel Forrester." "I'm Josephine Keller, the nurse from town." Alarm immediately crossed his features. "Is something wrong? Is it Jack?" She explained the situation as gently as possible, watching the young man's face cycle through fear, concern, and finally determination. "I'm coming back with you," he declared, already striding toward the barn. "What about the ranch?" Josephine asked. "Your brother was concerned the Johnsons owe us a favor," Daniel said over his shoulder. "Their boys can check on the stock for a few days. Jack's more important." Within the hour, they were riding back to town, Daniel's questions about his brother's condition coming in a steady stream. Josephine answered as honestly as she could, neither sugarcoating the severity nor unnecessarily alarming the young man. "He didn't want you to know," she admitted finally. "He was worried you'd fret." Daniel snorted. "That's Jack for you, takes care of everyone but himself." He glanced at her sideways. "You must care about him riding all this way." "It's my job," she replied automatically. "Is it your job to stay up all night with patients too?" he asked shrewdly. Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Your brother needed medical attention." Daniel smiled, a knowing look beyond his years. "If you say so, Miss Keller." When they arrived in town, Jackson was awake and arguing with Dr. Montgomery about getting up. The sight of his brother silenced his protests. "Danny," he breathed, falling back against the pillows, "you shouldn't be here." "Where else would I be?" Daniel retorted, crossing to the bedside. "You think I wouldn't notice when you didn't come home?" Jackson's gaze shifted to Josephine, a mix of betrayal and resignation in his eyes. "You rode out to the ranch." "Someone had to," she replied evenly, "and you were in no condition to do so." To her surprise, a small smile formed on his lips. "Stubborn woman, stubborn cowboy," she countered. The days that followed established a rhythm. Josephine attended to her regular duties at the clinic during the day but spent her evenings caring for Jackson. Daniel took a room at the boarding house in town, dividing his time between helping at the ranch and visiting his brother. Jackson's recovery was slow but steady. The bloody coughing fits gradually decreased, though his weakness persisted. He chafed at the confinement, unused to spending his days indoors. "Tell me about Boston," he asked one evening as Josephine prepared his herbal steam treatment. "What made you leave it for this dusty little town?" She paused, considering the question. "I wanted to make a difference. In Boston, I was one of dozens of nurses. Here, I'm needed." "That's the only reason," he pressed. Josephine sighed, arranging the steaming bowl carefully. "My father wanted me to marry a banker's son, a sensible match, he called it." She smiled wryly. "I found nothing sensible about tying myself to a man who saw me as little more than a decorative possession. So you ran away." "I chose my own path," she corrected. "There's a difference." Jackson nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. After our parents died, everyone said we should sell the ranch, that two boys couldn't manage it alone, but it was ours, our choice." "And you've done well," she observed. "We've survived," he amended. "This year's been hard." "Drought hurt the grazing, cattle prices are down." He rubbed his face tiredly. "That's why I couldn't afford the doctor. Every penny's going back into the ranch." Josephine placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You can't run a ranch if you're dead, Jackson Forrester." He covered her hand with his own, the calloused warmth of his skin sending an unexpected shiver through her. "I'm starting to see that, Josephine Keller." The way he said her name, soft yet deliberate, made her breath catch. For a long moment, neither spoke, the connection between them almost tangible in the quiet room. Then Jackson coughed, breaking the moment. Josephine busied herself with adjusting his pillows, her cheeks warm. "You should rest," she said briskly. "Doctor Montgomery wants to listen to your lungs again tomorrow." But as she turned to leave, Jackson caught her wrist. "Thank you," he said simply, "for finding me that day, for not listening when I told you not to get the doctor." "You're welcome," she replied, allowing herself a small smile. "Though I hope you've learned your lesson about being stubborn." His answering grin was weak but genuine. Probably not, but I've learned other lessons. As October turned to November, Jackson's health improved enough for him to move to the boarding house where Daniel was staying. Though no longer under her direct care, Josephine found reasons to check on him daily, telling herself it was merely professional concern. The first snow of winter dusted Willow Creek in mid-November, transforming the dusty frontier town into something almost magical. Josephine was wrapping a young boy's sprained wrist when the clinic door opened, bringing in a swirl of snowflakes and Jackson Forrester. "Mr. Forrester," she greeted him, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the sight of him. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," he assured her, stomping snow from his boots. "Just here for my checkup." After the young patient left, Josephine listened to Jackson's lungs with the stethoscope, noting with satisfaction the absence of the fluid that had nearly drowned him from within. "Your recovery is remarkable," she observed, stepping back, "though you're still thinner than you should be." "Mrs. Parsons at the boarding house is doing her best to fatten me up," he replied with a chuckle. "Says I'm an insult to her cooking." Josephine smiled, recording his progress in the patient ledger. "You should be able to return to full duties at the ranch soon, though I'd advise against any cattle drives until spring." Jackson nodded, but made no move to leave. Instead, he stood by her desk, turning his hat in his hands in an uncharacteristically nervous gesture. "Is there something else, Mr. Forrester?" she prompted. "Jack," he corrected. "After coughing blood all over your dress, I think we're past formalities." She laughed softly. "Jack, then." "What's troubling you?" "Nothing's troubling me," he said quickly. Well, the town's having that Thanksgiving gathering next week, at the church." "Yes, I know." Josephine waited, puzzled by his hesitation. He took a deep breath. "I was wondering if you might want to go with me." The simple request hung in the air between them. Josephine stared at him, momentarily speechless. "It's just a dinner," he added hurriedly, misinterpreting her silence. "But I thought." "Well, I'd like to thank you properly for saving my life, and yes," she interrupted, surprising herself with the eagerness in her voice. "I'd like that very much." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a storm, brilliant and full of promise. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed, unable to suppress her own smile. The Thanksgiving celebration was a community affair, with seemingly every resident of Willow Creek crowded into the church's meeting hall. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted turkeys, venison, pies, and all manner of side dishes contributed by the townspeople. Josephine wore her best dress, a deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair. When Jackson arrived to escort her from her small house near the clinic, his appreciative gaze made her glad she'd taken extra care with her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. Throughout the evening, Josephine was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the respectful way he introduced her to ranchers she hadn't yet met, his attentive listening when she spoke, the brush of his hand against hers when passing dishes. Though they were surrounded by the entire town, it felt strangely intimate. "Your nurse and Forrester seem to be getting along well," she overheard Mrs. Montgomery say to her husband. "About time that boy found a good woman," the doctor replied. "Maybe she can keep him from working himself to death." Josephine pretended not to hear, but couldn't help the warmth that spread through her at the implication. After the meal, as people mingled and children played underfoot, Jackson guided her to a quieter corner. "Too noisy for you?" she asked. "Needed a moment," he admitted. "Still not used to being around so many people after being cooped up for weeks." Josephine studied him carefully. "You're looking much stronger, the color's back in your face. Thanks to you." His voice was soft, almost reverent. "I've been thinking a lot about that day you found me. The day you tried to convince me coughing blood was normal," she teased gently. He laughed. "I was a fool." "You were scared," she corrected. "There's a difference." Jackson's expression grew serious. "I was. Not just of being sick, but of failing Danny, failing the ranch, failing my parents' memory." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You made me see that taking care of myself isn't weakness." "It's not," she agreed, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "It's the most important kind of strength." "Josephine," he began, then hesitated. "I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks. Getting to know you beyond just the nurse who bosses me around." She laughed. "I do not boss you around. You absolutely do," he countered with a grin, "and thank God for it." His expression sobered. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I care for you. More than I expected to care for anyone again." The confession hung between them, as delicate and perfect as a snowflake. Josephine felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the sincerity in his gaze. "I care for you too," she whispered, "though I tried very hard not to." "Why?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Because caring for patients is one thing, caring for a man I might lose." She shook her head. "It scared me." Jackson gently tilted her chin up, his eyes searching hers. "I'm not going anywhere, not if I can help it." Before she could respond, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that asked permission even as it was granted. Around them, the sounds of the celebration continued, but Josephine was aware of nothing but the warmth of his lips on hers and the certainty blooming in her heart. As winter settled over Montana territory, Jackson and Josephine's courtship became the subject of approving gossip throughout Willow Creek. They took sleigh rides under starlit skies, shared meals with Daniel, who teased them mercilessly, and spent quiet evenings by the fire in her small parlor, talking of dreams and pasts and possible futures. When Christmas arrived, Jackson presented her with a hand-carved wooden box for her medical instruments. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the intricate wildflowers he'd etched into the lid. "I wanted to give you something useful," he explained. "Something that honors who you are and what you do." Her gift to him was a warm wool scarf she'd knitted during her evenings alone. "To keep the cold air from your lungs," she told him. "I'm not having you relapse on my watch." He wrapped it around his neck immediately, tugging her closer with the ends. "Yes, madam," he murmured before kissing her soundly. By February, the Forrester ranch was showing signs of recovery under the brothers' careful management. A neighboring rancher had offered to buy their spring calves at a premium price, and a timely snowmelt promised good grazing for the coming season. "Come see the ranch," Jackson urged Josephine one crisp Saturday morning. "Really see it, not just riding through to fetch Danny." The property looked different in the winter light, the rolling pastures covered in a blanket of pristine snow, the mountains a majestic backdrop against the clear blue sky. Jackson showed her everything with obvious pride: the barn he and Daniel had expanded themselves, the spring-fed creek that never ran dry, the grove of cottonwoods where his parents were buried. "It's not much compared to what you had in Boston," he said as they stood on the porch, looking out over the land. "It's everything," she replied honestly. "You've built something meaningful here, Jack." He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I want to build more with you." Josephine's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" Instead of answering, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "I'm saying I love you, Josephine Keller. I'm saying that finding you, or you finding me, more accurately, was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I was coughing up blood at the time." She laughed through sudden tears. "That's hardly romantic." "No," he smiled, dropping to one knee despite the snow. "What about this? I'm saying I want to spend every day of my life with you, building something together that's stronger than either of us alone. I'm saying I want you to be my wife, if you'll have a stubborn cowboy who had to nearly die to recognize what was important." "Jack," she whispered, her voice catching. "Are you certain? Your life here is so different from what I knew before." "I've never been more certain of anything," he declared. "The only question is whether you feel the same." In answer, she pulled him to his feet and kissed him, pouring every ounce of her love into the gesture. When they finally parted, both breathless, she pressed her forehead to his. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you. They were wed in the spring, when the wildflowers carpeted the meadows and new life burgeoned across the ranch. The entire town turned out for the celebration, Doctor. Montgomery giving a toast to the nurse who wouldn't take no for an answer, and the cowboy smart enough to listen eventually. As Josephine and Jackson danced under the stars, surrounded by friends who had become family, she couldn't help reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, noticing her distant expression. "I was thinking about that day behind the livery," she admitted. "How close I came to not walking that way, how close you came to." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. "But you did, and I didn't, that's what matters." "Still," she persisted, "if I hadn't found you, but you did," he interrupted firmly. "You found me, Josie, and then you saved me in more ways than one." As the years passed, the Forrester ranch prospered. Daniel eventually married the schoolteacher's daughter and built his own house on the property. Josephine continued her nursing work, splitting her time between the town clinic and the small infirmary she established at the ranch for neighboring families too far from town. Their first child, a daughter, arrived just before their second anniversary, a strong, lunged girl with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. 2 more children followed in the years after, filling the expanded ranch house with laughter and energy. On their 10th anniversary, Jackson took Josephine to their special spot by the creek, a picnic basket in hand and silver threading his temples. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Forrester," he said, pouring her a glass of wine they'd been saving for the occasion. 10 years, she marveled, accepting the glass. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you behind that livery." "Best worst day of my life," he chuckled, "though I maintain you're still the bossiest woman I've ever met." She arched an eyebrow. "Is that any way to talk to the woman who saved your life?" "It's exactly the way to talk to the woman I love more today than I did 10 years ago," he countered, leaning over to kiss her softly. As they sat together watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine felt a profound contentment. The journey hadn't always been easy. There had been hard winters, difficult births she'd attended, times when the ranch struggled, but through it all, they'd faced each challenge together. "No regrets?" Jackson asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Josephine looked at him, at the lines of hard work etched around his eyes, the strength in his weathered hands, the unwavering love in his gaze, and smiled. "Not one," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder as the first stars appeared above. "After all, how could I regret finding a cowboy coughing up blood when it led me to everything I never knew I wanted?"